Hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar here. A little bit about the structure of the event here today. So the first thing that we're going to be taking a look at is the kind of core problem in implementing these core system projects such as ERP and CRMs without a proper integration platform and integration strategy, and the kind of problems that can result to. And then we'll look at the kind of correct way of doing things and compare this in sort of a little bit of a kind of like a mock-up project plan and project approach to kind of highlight how these issues actually affect these rollout projects and what are the problems that can actually arise during the project when going about this in a little bit of a maybe like a backwards manner, as is usually the case with many customer projects that we've gone through. And then finally we'll have a little bit of a look through on a customer case from Finland for a Raisio Corporation, which is a basically manufacturer of these sort of how could you say, like wholesale health food goods. So they're doing like cholesterol butter and cookies and things like that. But that's an excellent case. Since basically we did everything correct there and even won an award from SAP for that project. But I guess without further ado, let's actually dive into the topic here today. So we're here today to talk about basically system integration projects and, well, specifically ERP and CRM projects, as they are usually the most important systems for many customer organizations. And at the same time as them being usually the most important systems, they also, of course, have the most dependencies to other systems and business partners, and of course, directly to customers if you're running a web shop and things like that. So at the same time that they are the most important ones, they also have the most integrations as well. And this is basically the root of the problem. And this is something that in the integration scheme, we are calling that results in a problem called the spaghetti architecture. And the problem there with this sort of a spaghetti architecture is that the integrations towards these ERP and CRM and basically whatever system are implemented with no proper planning or management or governance for those integrations, and they are kind of treated as maybe like this, or even you could think of it like a necessary evil instead in order to get that system project up and running. And often it's the case that it's actually the system vendor doing those integrations, implementing those data connectivity use cases and data flows so that the system can operate according to the specifications. But like I said, this results in quite a lot of kind of problems from an architectural point of view, but also from the project rollout point of view. And the main problems here are kind of maybe listed in this sort of like 3 or 4 main categories that I've highlighted here. And the first one, of course, is that when you are doing integrations in this sort of a manner that integrations are not at the center of the project to deliver that ERP or CRM system, and they're kind of like treated on the outside of the project as like a small piece of the puzzle, that results in a point-to-point architecture when implementing the integrations, meaning that the ERP system is directly connected, for example, to the ERP or PIM or warehouse management or HR or whatever. So there's no kind of architecture or platform or solution in place to mediate the data transfer between our critical system, such as the ERP, and then all the other dependencies and constituents that system has. But the main problem here, as is highlighted here on the next slide, as we can see, is that results in a system architecture and basically an integration landscape where you have your ERP system, which has now been, or CRM system, or basically whatever, but we are now focusing on the ERP in this case. But as you can see, the usual case looks like something like this, that all of your other systems and dependencies are here on the left side, and they are just connected directly to the ERP system. And of course, you can immediately see a slight issue here, which is that we of course end up with a lot of different data flows which create dependencies between, for example, the CRM and the ERP system, or let's say the warehouse management system and the ERP system, but we are not taking into account what dependencies those other systems might have with one another. And this, of course, results in this sort of a huge snowball effect that if we are now starting to implement our integrations only after the project has been finished for the ERP or our CRM system, we kind of end up in a situation that we need to implement a lot of extra work since each of the data flows now needs to be individually implemented. And the snowball effect comes from the fact that if we are taking our new ERP into use and implement our integration directly as a point-to-point integration between the ERP and the warehouse management system, that usually requires changes now to be made on the warehouse management system, because in many cases the information content and the way that the actual technical integration works between the ERP and the warehouse management system is usually completely different when you're taking a new ERP into use, or even if you're implementing a completely new system from scratch. And this, of course, kind of leads to the snowball I was talking about, where if we need to now first implement our integrations, maybe implement some changes here on our other systems, but those changes in our other systems now, of course, affect completely kind of third-party systems as well. So we might end up in a situation where we first implement our nice integration to our warehouse management system, order a little bit of extra work from the warehouse management system vendor, but then we actually find out that, now we also need to change our PIM system or our product management system or product information management system, because that has a dependency to the warehouse management system. And then we find out that, actually, yeah, our product information management system has a dependency to our HR system or our supply chain management system. And now we need to change that. And then you end up in this sort of a never-ending loop of basically compounding changes and implementations that you need to do. And that's not even taking into account any of the existing kind of outbound connectivity issues that you might have with existing business partners, existing, let's say, web shops or other sort of marketplaces, or even direct customer communication using, for example, EDI or just file-based approaches. So if you implement these integrations to the kind of constituents and end customer sides using the same ideology, that creates even more problems, because now you're in a situation that, of course, your B2B partner don't like to change their systems to suit your new ERP, and now that problem has to be solved either by custom development here on the ERP side of things, or then your business partner needs to do that change, which of course results in extra work for them. And this is kind of the core of the issue and the problem of doing things in this sort of a reverse order of first implementing the ERP and only afterwards implementing the integrations themselves. And maybe to kind of highlight and summarize this in a couple of sentences, and what the kind of core problem here, of course, also is that usually when you are approaching projects in this manner, the ERP or system vendor will quite often kind of suggest that, yeah, we'll do those integrations, and they bake that integration work into the implementation estimate that they give you when they are actually running that implementation project or that rollout project for the system. But the matter of the fact is basically that system vendors are not integrators. So their tools that they're using to provide those integration capabilities, the processes, techniques, and even the know-how, so the kind of specialist know-how there is not aimed at integrations. They are best at basically developing and customizing and delivering that system. They are not that good in actually implementing the integrations. So usually this can result in something like 2 to 5 times the kind of effort and the cost for implementing all of those different integrations that you need to actually run and onboard your system. And of course, that's the kind of one of the main reasons that we end up in this sort of a situation that we have our point-to-point integration architecture that we covered here a little bit, that creates a lot of problems with the dependency management and those kind of snowballing changes to other systems and processes. But also what that also means is that then they are also accounting usually only for the direct dependencies towards the ERP, and like I said, not for the other stuff that also has an effect and has a dependency towards that ERP. And usually that's actually the main reason that kind of it's kind of a common joke even in the IT scene that ERP projects never go according to budget and they're never on time. And the integrations are the main reason for that, because the integrations have not been considered at the beginning of the project, and that results in this horrific end scenario that then is actually the main reason or the culprit for this problem of having these sort of projects usually go a little bit over budget, or in sometimes a lot over budget, and almost always are behind schedule. But of course, what we would suggest, and according to of course our experience with working with hundreds of customers in projects like this, is that there is a solution, and the solution is to use an integration platform to connect your ERP system to all the dependencies, as well as all the kind of business partners, customers, web shops, and so on, because this changes the paradigm of implementing the actual ERP solution by quite a bit. So the first obvious benefit or reason of doing things in this way is, well, of course, quite straightforward. And the main reason there is that if you think about the number of connectivity data flows or number of integrations that you need to implement, you can actually just frankly reduce that number of implementation needed when utilizing a properly architectured integration platform such as Frends, because now instead of us having to create a bunch of integrations on the ERP to everything, we can actually now, for example, just create a single integration to manage all incoming orders. And now the integration platform is the one who is managing that order input or order management towards your system or ERP, and then it's just connecting to all the other systems in that similar one-off fashion. So instead of you having to do, let's say, 500 integrations for your ERP, with an integration platform, that number can usually be reduced to something like 250. So we can usually get by with, let's say, less than half the number of integrations needed, because the integration platform is architectured in a way that allows us to reuse those components and reuse the functionality across all the different needs and dependencies that we have in place there. And of course, this also results in the second big benefit, which is now that if we actually turn the project on its head a little bit, so rather than try and implement the ERP first or create that kind of rollout project first and finalize the ERP first and only afterwards create the integrations, the correct pattern would be to first actually implement all the necessary kind of system and business partner and the dependency integrations, and you can create those basically against your old system or just between the existing systems if you're onboarding a completely new system. But what this allows us to do is that if we first actually create the needed integrations, this will give us basically knowledge and understanding through the integration platform on what do we actually need physically and technologically and logically from the ERP vendor in order to make that transition or rollout project as smooth as possible. So from a concrete perspective, if we are using a proper integration platform with governance features, orchestration, and things like that, we can actually use those functionalities to automatically generate a report, for example, telling us that, okay, our supply chain management system needs these sorts of functionalities from the ERP, and then it's up to the integration platform to implement those. But we can, of course, now use that to reduce the work effort of actually implementing the ERP itself. So this actually means now that you're moving some of the work away from the ERP implementation project and putting that into use in implementing the integration platform, because basically you are in a situation that you are paying for those integrations anyway, one way or another. So quite typically, it's like the ERP vendor or the system vendor who kind of gives you a work estimate that, okay, that those integrations that our system needs, that's, let's say that it's 100 days to implement those, or 1,000 days if it's a really large scale project there. But the problem, it kind of comes back to this issue that we discussed earlier, that the system vendor is not that great in actually implementing those integrations and processes according to the best practices and kind of like using a future-proof architecture. So if you're paying for that integration anyway, it makes a lot more sense to use a dedicated solution, dedicated experts to implement that, and leave the system development to the system developers, and of course the other way around. And sometimes that can be like 10 times faster and more cost effective to use this sort of an approach compared to building those point-to-point integrations between the systems and systems themselves. And of course, one kind of key issue here is, or key point here is that you have to consider your rollout project as a kind of one, let's say, cost, or there's a total cost to implement and roll out that new system. And if you're paying for the integrations already, and you kind of take that integration part away from that system or system vendor's project or work estimate and put that into use using integrations, and if the integrations done with a dedicated solution or integration platform are more or faster and more efficient, that of course means that then the total cost of the project can be much lower than what you originally thought when implementing the solution and going about with the rollout. And of course, there's a whole bunch of other kind of key points here that we could cover, such as, for example, using an integration solution such as this to roll out the ERP and first implementing the integrations themselves and only the ERP afterwards allows us to kind of have complete control over which system is now actually transferred to target the new ERP instead of the old one, and we can kind of maybe just set it up so that with a flick of a button, we basically make our warehouse management system now migrate from the old ERP to the new ERP. We can, of course, solve things like if some of your systems are in the cloud or all of your systems are on premise, but your new ERP is coming from the cloud. How do you now manage the data transfer between your old on-premise systems and your new cloud-based ERP, and so on and so on? But the key point here is, I think, covered, or the kind of key point that I want to convey in this webinar is covered, I think, pretty well in these two slides. So the systems project done the wrong way. So this is something that I see all the time with a lot of customers, that when you are running a systems project, you basically start off with the planning phase. So you kind of plan out that you need a new system, and you maybe make some specifications. You maybe contact some vendors and do an RFP process and select the vendor that you want to kind of now have implement your new system. Or if it's a cloud-based service, you kind of compare those services and then purchase that service that you want. And after the planning and selection of the vendor, it's quite typical that then the actual implementation for that ERP or CRM is kind of treated as its own kind of separate individual implementation project, which basically starts and finishes, and all the kind of internal functionality of the system is implemented at this stage. And only after the system is kind of or the system project is kind of seemingly finished, we start looking at the integrations. And this is the main issue here, that the order in which we are doing things is wrong, because now it's almost guaranteed that there will be like some problem or issue or unforeseen consequence when moving from one system to another, and you discover a problem when implementing the integration. So for example, we don't get all the data that we used to from our ERP and our other system. So let's say our supply chain management system needs that info that we are now missing. So of course, this leads to the main problem that now, of course, you need to order additional work from the ERP vendor and to basically bring that information available. But then this is the kind of problem as well, that then that additional work usually results in the ripple effect or the snowball effect, that now that, okay, if we need to do a slight change here to include our missing information from the supply chain management system, then that has an effect on the second system and the third system and the fourth system, and so on and so on and so on. And what this usually results in is that when you look at the kind of system implementations projects from a statistical point of view, almost always those projects go really well until basically the integration part starts. So up until step 5, we are always on budget and on schedule and everything is nice and dandy, but then the problems start when the integration is introduced, and the end result is almost always that the project is late and over budget. But of course, the right way to do that would be to take the integration planning and actually even implementation of the integrations into account before we go on to the actual system integration or system implementation part. Because this, of course, is kind of now looking back onto all the benefits that we discussed a little bit earlier about using this sort of an integration platform, because now you kind of follow along exactly the same logic or exactly the same plan, but rather than finalize the system project or the system implementation project before, we want to have all the integrations in place before the systems project is finished, because this will allow us to basically do that flip of a switch. So change that existing integration that we've implemented here in the early phases to target that new system, and the work estimate and the kind of effort estimate to do that sort of a target switch or kind of like make the migration from the old to the new is something like 5% of the effort compared to going about this in this sort of an iterative manner. And of course, we might have some problems in these scenarios as well, but now, of course, we have an integration platform and integration strategy in place, which means that we have processes and ways of figuring how to solve those problems without having to actually order extra work from, let's say, the system project vendor or compromise that system project implementation timetable, because all of those issues can now be solved using the integration platform. And of course, the final end result of all of this is that then, well, you kind of manage the changes, manage the existing integrations, create that rollout plan. And if the problem is in an integration, the integration solve it, and the project delivery organization or the systems project delivery can focus on what they know best, which is, of course, delivering that system in itself. And in our experience, first taking the integrations into account before the implementation of the actual system is what makes the project be on time. And of course, that results in everyone being happy. Well, maybe just a couple of words here. So, of course, what we are using here in all of our customer cases is Frends. Well, and Frends is, of course, an integration platform capable of doing all of this and much more. But what I wanted to highlight here in our last slide was basically this case from a customer of ours from 2 years or a couple of years back, which is Raisio Group. And like I kind of like this or explained a little bit here in the beginning of the webinar, that Raisio operates in 12 countries, and it's like has a lot of kind of health related products and kind of edible foods or superfoods. But basically, back in 2017, Raisio had adopted a strategy that they wanted to grow via acquisition. So they were buying a lot of companies to merge to themselves and of course, gain market share that way. And it was imperative for them that all the new organizations could be kind of onboarded as effectively as possible to their existing centralized systems. So you could think of them kind of running through this sort of a major systems project like 4 times every year, because every time they buy out a company, they need to kind of treat that as a major systems project where they're integrating all of that new company's systems to the centralized systems that Raisio already, of course, owned. But additionally, they had a situation that they were in a situation that they had 8 ERPs, so spread all over the place. So one of them was in Germany, and a couple in Sweden, a couple in Finland, and a couple in the UK, and so on. But they decided that they are going to get SAP, and they're going to have one single centralized SAP to manage all of their newly acquired companies, but of course all of their existing manufacturing processes as well. And of course, what we did here with Raisio was that before any of the new ERP implementation started and before any of the new acquisitions using the strategy or following the corporate strategy they had set in place, we came in there with Frends and actually audited their environment and created all the necessary integrations according to the kind of best practice architecture I described earlier, so that we had kind of our kind of starting point when the ERP project starts and when the acquisitions start coming in is at like as a high place as a good place as possible. And quite unexpectedly, well, not from our perspective, but from the customer's perspective, now that we had done this sort of kind of pre-work of actually taking all of those existing dependencies between business partners and systems and implementing those on the Frends platform, once the SAP's project actually started, the project actually came under budget and under schedule, and we managed to successfully migrate all of those 8 ERPs into one, so that one new SAP, and there were over 1,000 integrations in total that we needed to implement to all of those different 8 ERP systems. But the coolest part of all of this was that actually Raisio won the silver award for 2017 SAP Quality Awards, which is basically what SAP is awarding their customers for successful project rollouts, and they kind of want to highlight how well these particular projects have gone. And of course, that was in the Nordic and Baltic countries. So that was a really nice kind of a recognition from, of course, towards the customer, but also from the customer towards us, that we were able to actually take this super complicated situation, and the customer was almost kind of like despairing a little bit because things seemed to kind of fall out of place and that the plan wasn't properly in place. But because we went in and we flipped the project plan and the ideology on its head, so that we first do the integrations and then the implementation, enabled the customer to get that award and go greet the SAP people in Germany. But that's pretty much everything I wanted to go through today. Here's some of our customers, just as a reference there, and I'd like to maybe point out that as an enterprise integration platform here with Frends and HiQ, we've done hundreds and hundreds of basically system implementation projects, ERP projects, CRM projects, exactly using this pattern and this ideology. And this is kind of the most important thing that we want to get customers to try and understand when they are planning systems projects, and especially when they are planning and considering integrations around those systems and those projects. But like I said, we are kind of running out of time here slowly, and I think we have 5 minutes left. So I'd like to thank you for your time. and we hope to see you in the next webinar.